Good evening. My name is Mimi Zukoff, and I represent the Summit, New Jersey Environmental Commission in the Summit Area Green Faith Circle. We are so excited to have all of you here tonight to learn from Dr. Doug Tallamy about some easy steps each of us can take to help our ecosystem thrive and survive. Tonight's lecture has been sponsored in part by the Summit Environmental Commission from a Sustainable Jersey grant funded by the PSD&G Foundation, and in part by the Summit Area Green Faith Circle. We have teamed up with the Summit Public Library, which has been kind enough to host tonight's lecture and to manage the technical logistics. Thank you to Robin Carroll Mann, who has represented the library and has been my partner in this endeavor. We also thank the Summit Interfaith Council, who have been an invaluable partner in supporting our event, and the City of Summit Communications Office for their exceptional publicity assistance. Before we start, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. There will be 500 people on this call tonight. Throughout the lecture and during the Q&A at the end, all microphones will be muted. If you would like to ask a question during the Q&A, please type it into the chat. The moderators will be monitoring only the chat function and will pose the questions to the speaker. This presentation is being recorded, and the library will both post the recording on their website and send each participant a link later this week. Also in that email, you will be given the opportunity to be added to the mailing list of our Morris and Union County, New Jersey working group supporting pollinators. That is just for people who are in New Jersey. Last summer, a very dear environmental colleague told me about Doug Tallamy's new book and sent me some video clips. She insisted that I watch them right away. When I did watch, I found myself spellbound. Prior to that day, although I am an avid gardener and environmentalist, I knew nothing about the importance of native plants to our ecosystem. I became an instant convert to Dr. Tallamy's cause and was encouraged that there was something easy that I could do to save biodiversity and protect our threatened ecosystem. And because of this experience, I started working with my environmental community to make tonight's lecture happen. Doug Tallamy is the T.A. Baker Professor of Agriculture in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he has authored over 100 research publications and several highly acclaimed books. He has taught insect-related courses for 40 years. Chief among his research goals is to better understand the many ways insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. Doug's new book, Nature's Best Hope, released in February 2020, is a New York Times bestseller. From our planning conversations, I found out that the Summit community has a special connection to Doug. He is a local boy. Born in Plainfield, Doug grew up in Berkeley Heights. He swam for the Summit swim team when he was in grade school and worked for Overlook Hospital when he was in college. And with no further ado, I present Doug Tallamy.
Thank you, Mimi. I forgot about my years at Overlook. My mother worked there too. Okay. Well, thanks for coming, everybody, tonight. I want to give you some idea what my idea what Nature's Best Hope is. But before I do that, I want to return to what happened in 2019 in the fall. We had what is known as an oak mast. All the oaks in the red oak group got together and decided to make their acorns at the same time. And this is what it looked like in a lot of places. Well, I'm easily entertained, so I took one of those acorns and I stared at it, and I was rewarded because an insect started to chew its way out of the acorn. First it chewed a hole, forced its head through there, then it forced its entire body through there. It was a tight squeeze, looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Finally plopped down. Very dangerous time for this insect larva because it is good to eat. A lot of things are after it. So it gets to safety by wiggling and squirming below the surface of the soil in about 30 seconds. And once it's underground, it stretches in all directions and forms a chamber. And within that chamber, converts itself to a pupa and stays there for 2 years. After 2 years, comes out as an acorn weevil. That's what an acorn weevil looks like. A lot of people think weevils have big noses because it looks like they do, but that's actually an extension of the head capsule, and the mouth parts are way down here at the end of that extension. They take those mouth parts and they chew a hole down into the center of the acorn, turn a lay an egg in that, and that's how the larva gets down there. Now, you might wonder why they spend 2 years underground. Why don't they come out next year like most insects? And the answer is red oak acorns take 18 months to complete their development. So if they came out the very next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns for them. Well, of course, after the weevil leaves, it leaves a hole, and that is a true vacuum. You know that nature abhors a vacuum. And in this case, she has filled it with 3 species of temnothorax ants, tiny little ants that live. The entire colony lives within the vacated holes made by acorn weevils. And if they find a new acorn, they're excited because their old acorn is falling apart. So they tell everybody it is time to move, grab the kids, grab the eggs. They move the whole colony into the new acorn in about 30 minutes, post a guard there to make sure nobody else comes in. And then they will live in this new acorn until it decays in about 2 years. Well, about this point, my wife says, what is your point? What are you trying to tell us? I'm trying to tell you that is just one of literally millions of very specialized interactions, largely between animals and plants that comprise most of nature. This is another one, the relationship, specialized relationship between jays and acorns. Jays are the primary disperser of oak acorns. The specialized relationship between witch hazels and a group of moths called winter moths. They fly very late, and witch hazel, of course, blooms very late. And you don't see them pollinating witch hazel because it happens at night. But they both depend on each other at this point. The specialized relationship between pileated woodpeckers and carpenter ants. Carpenter ants is what they rear their young on. And you're not going to have carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have this bee, Andrena facilia, unless you have that plant, Facilia. That is the only pollen that bee can reproduce on. As a matter of fact, pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. We've got about 4,000 species of native bees, and more than a third of them are highly specialized. They can only reproduce on the pollen of particular plants. So for example, there are at least 13 species in this area that can only reproduce on perennial sunflowers. You won't have Baltimore checker spot unless you have white turtlehead, on and on and on. Nature really is a series of specialized relationships. Today, though, these relationships, nature itself is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we did not take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, leave it as it is. And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. Well, leaving the country as it was is no longer an option for us because we didn't. Only about 5% of the lower 48 states is anything close to its original pristine ecological condition. And that's because we've logged the country repeatedly. We have tilled it and drained it. We've grazed it. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland, which is 4.5 times the size of Texas. And of course, we've paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them. And you can spell that any way you want. We have polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We've drained our aquifers, introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas. In short, we've carved up those natural areas into tiny remnants of their former selves. And each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated from other remnants to sustain the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. Why have we done that? Well, I imagine we thought the earth was so big we could foul it. It was our nest, but we could foul our nest forever and it wouldn't matter because it was so big. But of course we were wrong about that. And that's why we're seeing scary headlines like this. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one, North America's lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. That's 1/3 of our North American bird population gone. Now the UN says, well, we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction, probably within the next 20 years. And I love the way they report it, as if it's just another headline. They go on to another headline. They might as well say we're going to lose oxygen in the next 20 years. This is not an option, folks. It is not an option. Well, I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, thus upon all of our houses, but that's not what this talk is about. This talk is about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that will take small efforts from a lot of people, but they will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return briefly to this headline. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, E.O. Wilson, the most famous entomologist of all times, Harvard emeritus, still alive. He's 92. He still writes a book a year. He told us what it would mean if we lost our insects, and he did it in this paper, The Little Things That Run the World, way back in 1987. His message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappear, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals, even many of our freshwater fish, those food webs would collapse and those animals would disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we'd have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. The good news is that doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape in order to do it. Why do we need to? Well, remember, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on nature, totally dependent on what we call ecosystem services. They come from healthy, functioning ecosystems. Here are a few things that plants deliver to us, but everything else that's living on the planet as well, like oxygen, pretty important, clean water, also important. Carbon capture, enormously important in today's world. Plants are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, taking the carbon from that molecule and building their tissues out of it. And then they pump extra carbon into the ground, into the soil through their roots. Our soils are brown or black because of carbon that plant roots have deposited there over the eons, where it's stable, by the way, for thousands of years. Plants build topsoil, hold it in place, they prevent floods, they dampen severe weather, they convert sunlight into food. If we lose our plants, we're going to have to eat sunlight without them. And I wish us luck. What do animals deliver to plants? Well, they provide pest control services. They pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They disperse plant seeds and other important things. So designing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is not a good idea. It never was a good idea, but today it's a downright terrible idea because we need more ecosystem services today than ever before. We've got 7.8, 7.9 billion people on the planet. Taking huge areas out of the planet at the same time we grow our population is pretty close to insanity. There have been visionaries through the ages who have recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth, and Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. One of the things he said is the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. Now, many of our indigenous groups were good at doing that, but our huge Western society and our huge Asian societies are terrible at doing that. We habitually take more from the earth than it has to offer, completely spoiling an area, going to another area, doing the same thing, clearly unsustainable. So Aldo had an idea that we humans were actually capable of developing what he called a land ethic. He knew that we had to use the earth. We had to farm and lumber and graze and mine. But he dreamt that we would learn to do that gently enough that we wouldn't destroy local ecosystems. And that's what he called the land ethic, wrote about it in the Sand County Almanac. What he didn't write about was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I suspect the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist in the same place at the same time. That notion was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, it's still embedded in our own culture, that he didn't even recognize it as an option. What I'm going to argue tonight is that not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head. We need to save nature, actually rebuild it where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. In other words, we have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, not get smaller every year, but thrive. Where should we start? Well, let's go back to private property. 78% of the entire country is privately owned. 85.6% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned. If we don't practice good conservation on private property, we're going to fail because we won't be working on enough of the land for it to work. There are, though, other options for conservation that we really haven't thought much about in the past. How about power and pipeline rights-of-ways? We've got 21 million acres in those types of landscapes. Railroad rights-of-ways, 3 million acres. Golf courses, another 2 million acres. Airports, 3 million acres. The Denver airport is twice the size of Manhattan. These are big places. 17 more million acres on roadsides. And then we have all the places we live, both in rural areas and suburbia and our cities, hundreds of millions of acres in those landscapes. If you add up just those spaces, that's 599 million acres. How big is 599 million acres? It's big. It's bigger than Vermont, plus New Jersey, plus Maine, Virginia, New York, Georgia, Florida, Oklahoma, Montana, California, even throw Texas in there. Not having a place to do conservation is not the issue. We can do conservation almost anywhere. Now, when I talk about conservation, I'm really talking about a form of restoration. But before you criticize me for that, I'm not trying to put things back exactly the way they were. That's probably impossible. But it doesn't mean we can't rebuild functioning ecosystems by recreating or uniting those specialized relationships between plants and animals as often as we can. That will create functioning ecosystems, even if they're a little bit different from what was here 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And they'll produce those ecosystem services. But not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally. We have to start with the most important species. And there are two groups that we can't do without. One of them is those flowering plants that we talked about. They're, of course, capturing the energy from the sun, turning it through photosynthesis into food in their leaves, which is pretty important. You're not going to have those flowering plants unless you have the pollinators that allow them to reproduce. So that's one group that is not negotiable. But now the energy from the sun is food locked up in plant leaves. We have to get that energy to animals. Most vertebrates don't eat plants directly. They eat something that ate plants, and that something typically is insects. And it turns out that caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So in our restoration, we must design landscapes that have a lot of caterpillars. Otherwise, we won't have functional food webs. Let me give you an example using the Carolina chickadee. Now up in New Jersey, you have the black-capped chickadee. There's chickadees all over the country. They're all pretty much the same bird doing the same thing. During the wintertime, they eat seeds. 50% of the time, the other 50% of the time, they eat insects. But when they're reproducing, their babies can't eat seeds. So they rear their young entirely on insects. And if they're in a healthy environment, most of those insects will be caterpillars. Chickadees are not exceptions. 96% of our birds rear their young on insects. Our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects. And most of those insects, it turns out, are caterpillars. How do I know that? There's a number of lines of evidence that suggest that. But this is a citizen science project that one of my grad students, Ashley Kennedy, did recently. She put out a call to bird photographers across the country to take pictures of birds during the breeding season and try to get pictures of the parents bringing prey items to the nest, and then send those pictures to Ashley. She's going to identify what the prey items were in the beaks and reconstruct the nestling diet for as many birds as possible in North America. And you're looking at the results. This is the nestling diet composition of 20 of the common bird families in North America. The green bars are the percentage of those diets that are caterpillars. And in 16 out of the 20 common bird families, caterpillars dominated the diet. So again, imagine what would happen if we took caterpillars out of our local ecosystems, out of our landscapes. Most of our birds would not be able to reproduce. So something special about caterpillars. What is it? Actually, there's several things special about caterpillars, and one of them is that they're soft. Think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is exoskeleton, it's cuticle. It's made of chitin, it's undigestible, and birds don't want a lot of that. And because they're soft, you can stuff the caterpillar down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring it. If you've ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. They take that beak, it's like a plunger. They just stuff it down there. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. Now, some of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar. They're nutritious. They're very high in fat, very high in protein, low percentage of chitin compared to many other insects, particularly beetles, which are not like little sausages. They're like little tanks. A lot of a beetle is undigestible, and many beetles have sharp edges. And it turns out the caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. Now, I mentioned carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate and you're a vertebrate. Birds are vertebrates. And we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids. So we have to get our carotenoids from plants, and we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. And that's why my wife Cindy makes sure I have lots of carrots to get my beta carotene, and lots of tomatoes to get my lycopene, and lots of whatever that is to get my lutein. And when I eat those things, it stimulates my immune system. I can't think of a better time to have a healthy immune system. Carotenoids are antioxidants. They run around our body, protect our DNA from oxidative damage. They improve color vision. When your mother said, eat your carrots, you will see better, she was right. She didn't know she was right, but it turns out she was right. Improves sperm vitality, improves sexual attractiveness. Now we're talking about things like this male prothonotary warbler who is bright yellow because he's had access to lots of luteins. And he takes those luteins and he makes pigments out of them, puts them in his feathers, and the brighter yellow he is, the more ladies he attracts. Where are they getting their carotenoids from? They're getting them from, of course, the things that they eat. But carotenoid content in bird prey items is not at all equal. These first two bars are types of caterpillars. They have far more carotenoids than other types of insect prey. This is the adult caterpillars here, the butterflies and moths. Fewer carotenoids because they're not eating green leaves anymore. It's just the caterpillars that eat the green leaves. And here's the earthworm way down here. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. So that and other studies suggest the caterpillars are probably not optional parts of bird diets. It's really looking like they are essential parts of bird diets. So let's just say birds need caterpillar. So the next question is, how many caterpillars do they need? Is one or two enough, or one or two a day enough? Well, let's go back to chickadees. We've got a lot of data on chickadees. How many caterpillars does it take to make a clutch of chickadees? One or two is not enough. It takes thousands. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest, to the point where they fledge. And after they fledge, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars for another 21 days until the chicks are independent. But they're flying all around, so nobody can count those. This is variable because of the number of chicks in the nest, but you're talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars to make one clutch of a bird that's 1/3 of an ounce. And if you want chickadees to breed in your yard, you've got to have all those caterpillars in your yard because they forage about 50 meters from the nest. They are not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. And if we build landscapes that don't have that many caterpillars, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like that's one of the major factors causing birds decline. We went to the original data set from Rosenberg et al. That's the group that said we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. And we divided the terrestrial bird species into two groups: the species that require birds, insects at some point in their life history, and the birds that don't require insects, things like doves and finches that can reproduce on seeds. They didn't lose any numbers in the last 50 years, but the birds that require insects on average lost 10 million individuals per species. Now, this doesn't prove cause and effect, but it certainly is suggestive that as insects go, so go our birds. Not rocket science, folks. If you take away the food, the things that depend on that food are going to disappear as well. So I'm concluding that if we want birds and other things around, and we do, because those are the things that run the ecosystems that support us, we're going to have to start landscaping for caterpillars and other insects. It's a new goal, because in the past we've landscaped just for aesthetics, just for beauty. But we can do it. We can have beautiful landscapes that also make caterpillars. How do we do that? We add caterpillars to your landscape by adding the plants that make them. That seems easy enough. But there is a catch, and that is that most plants don't make a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about which plants we're going to choose, and we have to be fussy because the caterpillars themselves are fussy. The monarch butterfly is a perfect example. It's not unusual, but it's a good example of host plant specialization. You can have all the crepe myrtles and all the ginkgos and all the boxwoods and all the hostas and all the Bradford pears and all the other plants that we bring in from Asia and decorate our yards with, and you won't make a single monarch caterpillar. You need milkweeds. That, again, is called host plant specialization, and 90% of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. Why is that? Because plants have made them that way. Plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. They are just too well protected. And that's why it's green out there in the summertime. It's not because there are no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat those plants. They are too well protected. And if you don't believe me, tomorrow go outside and eat a plant. See if you like it. Maybe wait till the leaves come out. You're not going to like it. There's a reason it's hard to get our kids to eat their vegetables. They inherently know that they're toxic. That's my little joke. I'm glad somebody, you're the first person that ever laughed at that. Okay, this is not a joke. Insects really do eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, they specialize. Every plant lineage that's out there protects itself with a unique cocktail of chemical defenses. An insect species can't adapt to all of them. So they pick one or two plants that are very similar to each other, and they get good. They develop adaptations that allow them to circumvent those plant defenses. They develop enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds, behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize the insect's exposure to those compounds. And once they fall into place, although it takes a long time for them to fall into place, but once they do, the insect is locked into eating that group of plants. Why is that? Because it didn't spend any time developing adaptations for other groups of plants. And that's why when we bring in plants from other continents, most of our insects cannot eat them. They've never seen them before. They've had no time to adapt to them. So all I'm saying here is that plant choice matters. If we're trying to rebuild food webs where we've dismantled them in the past, we need to choose the plants that are going to do that, or it won't work. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well it does work when we do choose our plants carefully. I'm going to start with our house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. We have 10 acres of a farm that was broken up. It was a very old farm. It had been farmed for 300 years. Last thing I did was mow it for hay. And when you mow for hay in this part of the country, you're really mowing all the invasive species, mostly escapees from our garden, things like multiflora rose and oriental bittersweet, Japanese honeysuckle and miscanthus and porcelain berry and so on. You mow that and you call that hay. So of course, when we built the house and they stopped mowing, that's what came back. We had 10 acres of a serious invasive species problem. This is my wife, Cindy. She's getting ready to clear that 10 acres. So if you have a bad problem from invasive plants, and most people do, believe it or not, don't give up. You can do it. Cindy proved it. It is a lot of work. There's no doubt about it. Fortunately, she enjoyed doing it. What was I doing while she was clearing the land? Well, I was telling her she was doing a good job. But I also was putting plants back. The goal was to rebuild the biodiversity on our property. So one of the early ones I started with was trying to get the Canadian owlet on our property. That's what a Canadian owlet looks like. I'd never seen one before. That's what the adult looks like. Well, you're not going to have Canadian owlet unless you have meadow rue. That's the only plant it eats. We didn't have any meadow rue. It probably was here hundreds of years ago before they started farming, but long gone. So I got some meadow rue seeds from somebody and planted them, grew very nicely. But, you know, I actually had very little faith that any Canadian owlets would find my little patch of meadow rue. So I didn't even go out and check it for at least 2 months. And finally, I walked by for some other reason, and there were Canadian owlets all over my meadow rue. So it was a big success. They'd come right away. Big surprise. And now we have a thriving population of meadow rue and Canadian owlet. So we've added 2 species to the property. Same story with the goldenrod stowaway. That's a misnomer, has nothing to do with goldenrod. This beautiful moth is a specialist on Biden's aristosa, ditch daisy. I did know where there was some Bidens, and a power line cut about 14 miles away. So I got some seeds, planted them, they grew very nicely. Well, it took about a year for the goldenrod stowaway to find my Bidens, but they did. I'm still amazed. I don't know where these things come from because there's really none very near me. And now we've got a good population of both of those. So now we've added 4 species. Hackberry emperor. I wanted the hackberry emperor, not because it's the most beautiful butterfly in the world, but because it belongs here. And as its name suggests, it is a specialist on hackberry. Well, we didn't have any hackberry. So I planted hackberry. Took 4 years for the butterfly to find my hackberry. But they did. We've got good numbers now. I walked by one of my hackberry trees last June, and there were 9 hackberry emperor caterpillars on a single branch. Did not plant goldenrod. It came in on its own, and along with it came many of the things that depend on goldenrod, like the brown-hooded owlet, the Arcigera flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. This is one that hasn't come, the goldenrod flower moth. I don't know why it hasn't come. It should have been here, but and that's what its caterpillars look like. But this is part of the fun. This is anticipation. It's like waiting for the ketchup to come out of the bottle. Every year I go out and I check for the goldenrod stowaway. One of these days it's going to be there, and that will be a great day. Planted Virginia creeper. A lot of people don't like Virginia creeper, but I don't know why. It's a great native plant. It has good fall color. It can climb our trees without strangling them or pulling them down. Makes very nutritious berries for the birds in the fall. It's a great plant for pollinators. People don't recognize that because the flowers are not showy, but the pollinators certainly love it. And it's the major host plant for many of our large sphinx moths, which are one of the primary components of cardinal diets. Things like the Pandora sphinx and its beautiful adult, the lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, all eat Virginia creeper. Want to see if I can get the double-toothed prominent. Just because it's such a cool looking caterpillar. Who wouldn't want the double-toothed prominent? Well, it's an elm specialist. So I scooped up some seeds from the gutter at the University of Delaware. We've got some big elm trees that never died and planted them. In 6 days, they germinate and they take off. It's been 18, 19 years since I planted them, and they're a good 70 feet tall at this point. So another big success. The caterpillar came right away. Wanted the evening primrose moth because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. Well, we didn't have any evening primrose, so we planted that. The moth comes and spends the day sitting in the flowers with its head stuffed down in there. I'm not sure why they do that. And I planted lots of oaks. Now, those are just examples of what I've put back on the property. But I want to focus on oaks for a while because they're such important plants. This is the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York. It's enormous. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. But, you know, I hear people say, I'm not going to plant it oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. Well, if it has to be 400 years old before you can enjoy it, you're right, you won't. But if you appreciate what your oaks are doing at your house, you can enjoy them right away. And I can say that with confidence because I planted my oaks mostly as acorns, which means they were free, or as 2-foot bare root whips, which means they cost $1.50. And immediately, the very first year, they started to rebuild the food web at my house by bringing in moths and the caterpillars that make those moths of things like the solitary oak leaf miner, juvenile's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, the orange-headed epicalema, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth, the orange-tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the orange-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the delightful dagger moth, the pleasant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crown bucolatrix, the white blotch heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red-lined panapoda, the laugher, and literally hundreds more species of moths. I haven't gotten to the butterflies yet, but the moths have come to the oaks on our property, and they come right away. This is a pin oak that has just popped its head above the leaves, and here's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that tree. So you don't have to wait hundreds of years for your moths to start to rebuild the food web at your house. It will happen immediately. This is what our house looks like now. I am sitting in that window right now. Actually, it'll look like this in about 2 weeks. Just to convince you, we put a lot of plants back. Not all of them yet. I'm still adding plants. And every time I add a new plant lineage to our house, it increases the probability that new moth species will come and rebuild that powerful food web. So 4 years ago, I made it a goal to start to Try to get a picture of every species of moth that occurs on our property. I'm still working on it, but I'm up to 1,044 species of moths. That's more species of moths on our 10 acres than all the birds in all of North America. As a matter of fact, we've got 10 acres, but Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So on 1/240,000th of the landmass, we've got 40% of all the moths that occur in Pennsylvania. And because so many of these are types of bird food, we have recorded 59 species of terrestrial birds that have bred on our 10 acres, not flew by, but bred. Why is that important? Well, we saw this headline in the fall, just like the others. World Wildlife Fund says that 2/3 of the Earth's wildlife has vanished since 1970. But I'm thinking, not at our house. I am sure we have increased biodiversity by more than 2/3, and it didn't take that long, and we did it simply by putting the plants that support it back. So I'm offering this as a ray of hope, a ray of sunshine. This works, folks. Don't throw up your hands in despair. If we all start putting the plants back, we can get rid of these terrible headlines. But I know what you're thinking. We've got 10 acres and a lot of people just live in a little plot in suburbia. Will it work on smaller plots? Let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres, 18 times less land than Cindy and I have, and they're in the middle of a development. Everybody's got the big lawns. Well, they moved in. The first thing they did was get rid of their major invasive plant, which is Amur honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle. They planted lots of native plants, put in a water feature they call a bubbler, and then they sat back and started to count the birds that are using their yard. And they are up to 149 bird species that have used their yard, including 35 warbler species. Just to put that in perspective, we've only recorded 8 warbler species at our house. So does it work on smaller plots? Absolutely. How about urban yards? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago, because right on the other side of that wall there is one of the runways of O'Hare Airport. Over here is Kennedy Expressway. Pam has 1/10 of an acre. It's a pretty 1/10, but it's 1/3 the size of the average lot in North America. And it's not connected to any natural area at all. But Pam did the same thing. She got rid of her invasive plants, put in 60 species of native plants, put in a water feature for the birds. And then she sat back and started to count the birds that are using her property. She told me she does it in the afternoon with a glass of wine in her hand. I like that. 118 species of birds have used their yard so far, including a woodcock. If you haven't seen a woodcock lately, you can go to Pam's house and check it out. What about city centers, though? 82% of us live in cities. Are they all going to be left out? Well, in 2014, I was staring at this plant, Asclepias tuberosa. People call it butterfly weed. That reminds me, we've got a serious marketing issue with our native plants. We call them weeds and wonder why people don't plant them. So let's not call this butterfly weed. Let's call it Monarch's Delight. Okay, 2014, I'm staring at Monarch's Delight, and the first thing I saw were 2 species of leafcutter bees, a big one and a small one. Leafcutter bees, Megachiolidae. I know they're leafcutter bees because they carry their pollen on their tummy, not on their legs. Well, leafcutter bees have very strict requirements. You're not going to have leafcutter bees unless you have pollen and nectar, but also soft leaves. Leaves of redbud are perfect because they snip out the edges of those leaves and leave little semicircles, and they roll up those semicircles of leaf material and stuff it full of pollen, lay an egg on it, and then put the whole thing in a crack or a crevice, and that's how they reproduce. Well, there was a redbud growing right next to the Monarch's Delight, so the leafcutter bees had everything they needed, and that's why they were there. Pretty sure that's why there were bumblebees there as well. Remember, bumblebees overwinter as queens. There are no workers when they emerge in the spring. Any bumblebee you see right now is a queen. So make sure you don't kill any bumblebees now, because that's the entire year's worth of colony coming up. Well, that queen's working hard to start a new colony. And if she has a lot of efficient forage, a lot of flowers with pollen and nectar, she probably will succeed. And that's exactly what redbud delivers. And then I saw a monarch. Actually, I saw 2 monarchs foraging on Monarch's Delight. Now, this was 2014. In 2013, I'd gone the entire year without seeing a single monarch. That was the low point in the monarchs population in the East. Only 3.6% of the monarchs left compared to 1976. And this was June. It's very early for us to see monarchs this far north. So I was encouraged. Maybe the monarchs weren't going to disappear after all. Why were they there? Well, they had what they needed. They had monarch's delight. There was also another species of milkweed there. I think it's purple milkweed. So they had nectar, but they also had their host plant, all they needed. Do you know where I was? I was on the High Line in the middle of Manhattan. High Line's it was an elevated railroad that was abandoned for years. Somebody went up there, looked around. It was loaded with native plants that had seeded themselves in by themselves. So they said, let's make a tourist destination, and they did. And it's been very successful. Literally, millions of people visit the High Line every year. It's very popular. So there's always a lot of people up there. And this is the amount of nature that is on the High Line. It's a strip of plants along its edge, about 3 feet wide. This is Rick Darke. He was always after me to go see the wonderful plantings on the High Line. Well, I'm not much of a city boy, so I always drag my feet. But and you know, if I see beautiful plantings and nothing's using them, that's actually depressing to me. And that's what I thought I would see in Manhattan. I mean, after all, how are those things going to find this little bit of nature that's in the middle of Manhattan, 30 feet above the taxis? But I was completely wrong. Somebody's done a study of the bees using the High Line. They're up to 30 species that are using the few plants that are there. So I'm convinced now, if thoughtful native plantings can bring life back to the middle of Manhattan, they can do it anywhere. There are 4 things we need to think about if we want to succeed in a big way, and we do. And one of them is we have to shrink the area we have in lawn. We've got more than 40 million acres of lawn. This 40 million acres, that's a 2005 statistic. So who knows what we have now? That's bigger than the area of New England in an ecological deadscape like this. It's a status symbol. Now, we humans need our status symbols. I understand that, but let's have smaller status symbols. Let's cut the area of lawn in half. The area we keep, we will still manicure, we'll still be good citizens, but let's take half the area out. And if we replant half the area that's now in lawn, we can create a new national park that's 20 million acres in size. If we do it at home, we can call it Homegrown National Park. And it'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. You add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. What do you get when you put a park at home? Well, you get the opportunity to develop a personal relationship with the natural world, either for the first time or redevelop one that you had as a child. And you can do it at your own time and your own pace. All you have to do is go outside. Avoid those crowds. If you go to a real national park, it's a big deal. And there are millions of other people there. It's free. There's no admission fee, no travel hassles, never closed, no matter what pandemic comes down the pike. And you get to experience the natural world alone. I don't know how you're going to develop that personal relationship unless you do it alone, interacting with nature alone. This is particularly important for our poor kids, who Richard Louv says are suffering from nature deficit disorder. He says, you know, we got to expose them to nature. So we put 30 kids on a bus with a teacher, and they drive for an hour, and then they walk around a natural area for an hour, and the teacher tells them not to touch anything. Then they get back in the bus and they go home. And that's their exposure to the natural world, which I'm sure is better than nothing. But it's actually an exposure to 30 other kids and a teacher telling them not to touch anything. If they can go home and there's some living thing in their yard, they can develop that personal relationship that we're looking for, which is so important because our kids are the future stewards of the world. They're the future stewards of the planet. If they don't know what they're stewarding or why they're stewarding it, they're going to be lousy stewards. And maybe they will learn how to hunt lizards. I'm learning this from my own granddaughter. This is Zoe, who lives in Hawaii on a very modest piece of nature. It's a little patch of grass, 10 by 10, and a hedge. But there are no lizards there. And Zoe discovered that, and she sent me this picture to show just how you hunt lizards. You get on the ground and you disguise yourself with sticks and leaves so the lizards can't see you coming. And you crawl very slowly towards the lizards. No smiling. This is serious business here. You wear your best dress, that's okay, but you crawl toward the lizard, you catch the lizard, you put it in an aquarium, and then you're a steward of that lizard. You know, you have developed that personal relationship with that part of nature. Now, I don't think Zoe's going to spend the rest of her life crawling on the ground in her best dress looking for lizards. I don't think. She just sent me this picture, so who knows. But I guarantee she's going to remember hunting lizards in Hawaii the rest of her life. And I also guarantee that these experiences are going to help her be a great steward of the planet. If you want your kids to do more than hunt lizards, get Nancy Stranisti's book, Nature Play at Home. Dozens of examples of how to expose your kids to the natural world right where they live. And if you want to join Homegrown National Park, go to our new website, homegrownnationalpark.org. You can get yourself on the map. It's free. No, we're not going to use your data. What you do is you put in the information of where you live and the amount of area that you're going to plant in natives and rebuild that ecosystem. And then your little part of your county is gonna light up with a little firefly. And you will see who else has done this. We're trying to get that 20 million acres. We got over 7,000 people on the map right now. So we're a little bit short of the 320 million that are out there, but we're working at it. This is social media at its best. Let's spread the word, get on the map. Okay, we're gonna shrink the lawn. What plants are we gonna put in the area that we're taking out of lawn? Some of them have to be what I'm calling keystone plants. Remember what the keystone is. This is the Roman arch. Keystone is the stone in the middle of that arch. And if you take that stone out, the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because they are making most of the food. We found out that just 5% of our native plants are making 75% of that caterpillar food that drives those food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs, which means 85%, 86% of our native plants are contributing, but not all that much. So think of the keystone plants in your yard as the 2x4s in this ecological house that you are building at home. The 2x4s are essential. The house is not going to stand up. You can't build your ecological house out of wallpaper, but they're not the only thing you're going to build your house out of. So they're essential, but not sufficient. So the question is no longer simply are natives better than non-natives? Ecologically, I mean, they certainly are, but there are a lot of natives that aren't contributing all that much as well. So the question really becomes, do we want ecologically productive plants in our yards? Or benign plants that aren't doing much, or even worse, those ecologically destructive ones that become invasive species and biologically pollute, ecologically castrate all the land around us. I get an email once in a while from somebody saying, don't you know that ginkgos, ginkgo biloba from Asia, actually grew in North America 7 million years ago? That makes them native. That means we can plant them and everything will be great. Yes, I do know that ginkgos grew in North America 7 million years ago. We can argue about whether that makes them native today, but I'm not going to have that argument because that's not our metric anymore. It's not whether they're native or not, it's whether they're productive or not. I don't care if ginkgos grew on the moon 7 million years ago. They produce 0 species of caterpillars. So they're there, they're occupying space, but they're not contributing to your local food web. What is? Well, there's no plant better than one of our oaks in 84% of the counties of North America. In the mid-Atlantic states, they support 557 species of caterpillars, 557 species of bird food, over 950 species nationwide. There's no other plant genus that comes close to that. Here's the role of keystone oaks that they're playing in my yard. Now, so far, I've recorded 1,044 moth species in my yard, taking pictures of them. Again, I'll get to the butterflies one of these days. Out of the 1,044 species, 918 have known host plants. So there's more than 100. We don't know what they're eating. Out of the 918, 275 species use oaks. We have 69 genera of native woody plants on our property, and only one of them is Quercus, the oaks. And we've got hundreds of genera of herbaceous plants. So oaks represent less than 1.5% of our woody plant diversity and way less than 1% of our total plant diversity. But they support at least 30% of our moss species diversity. So imagine what would happen to the biodiversity at our house if we took oaks away. That's the role of keystone plants. How do you find out what your keystone plants are? Where you live, you go to the Native Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation website and put in your zip code, and the ranked list of both woody and herbaceous plants, ranked in terms of the number of caterpillars they support, will pop up for your county. And this is what a typical list looks like. I stopped because I ran out of room, not because these are all the keystone plants. Notice I say native oaks, native cherries, native willows. If I go to the nursery and say, I want to buy a cherry, they're going to sell me an ornamental cherry from China. If I want to buy a willow, they'll sell me a weeping willow. If I want to buy an oak, they probably sell me a sawtooth oak from China. You've got to specify that you want a native member of these their native genera, but you got to get a native member of it, because if you don't, it's going to reduce caterpillar use by 65%. We've done that experiment. These are the top herbaceous plants. Goldenrods support 110 species of caterpillars in our area. The various genera that asters were broken up to, very high. Sunflowers, very high. Those 3 genera alone also support specialist bees. At least 40 species of specialist bees won't be in your yard unless you have goldenrods, asters, and perennial sunflowers. If you do have them, you've got the chance of having all those native bees. Okay, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put in keystone plants. We're going to invite a lot of insects to our yard. Then we're going to kill them with our security light. And that, of course, is not the goal. There's a lot of research, particularly coming out of Europe, that is very convincing, that really looks like light pollution is one of the major causes of insect declines. These are all the ways that lights kill insects, particularly those all-important moths. But to me, this is actually good news. We've got to stop insect declines. I mean, it's just not an option to lose them. And if we can slow it down or reverse it by turning out our lights, we're getting off easy. I mean, that is easy. Just flick a switch. But I know what you're going to say. Well, I can't turn off that light over my garage because the bad man will come. All right, put a motion sensor on it so that it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to notice is the bad man doesn't come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white bulb out of your security light and put in a yellow bulb. A yellow LED bulb is the best. Yellow wavelengths are far less attractive to nocturnal insects than our white wavelengths. And of course, yellow LED lights are energy efficient. If we switched out our white lights that we have on all over the place for yellow lights overnight, we would save billions of insects and billions of dollars too, because they're much more energy efficient. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to bring in keystone plants. We're going to turn out our lights, and we're going to invite Mosquito Joe to come and kill all of our insects. This is a booming business all around the country. Mosquito Joe is single-handedly undoing everything I've been working on for the last 15 years. And he will say, well, this is a natural product, so it's okay. It's pyrethroids. And it is a natural product. It's from chrysanthemums. But cyanide is a natural product as well. So I'm not buying that argument. He'll also say it only kills mosquitoes, and that's not even close to true. It kills all the insects it comes in contact with. But the big thing is it doesn't work. You're paying a lot of money for something that doesn't work. You don't control mosquitoes in the adult stage. You control them in the larval stage. In order to control mosquitoes in the adult stage, you have to kill 90% of the adults. Mosquito Joe kills around 10%. So he's not even close. And that's why he has to keep coming back and charging you again and again and again. If you really want to control mosquitoes, you go for the larvae. You get a bucket, fill it full of water, put in some straw or hay and let it ferment for a couple of days, get nice and warm. You're building the diatom community and the algae community, and that's what mosquito larvae eat. This becomes an irresistible brew to the mosquitoes, the females that want to lay their eggs. They will oviposit in here. Wait a few days for those eggs to hatch, then you put in a mosquito dunk that you get at the hardware store. This is Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a natural bacterium that only kills aquatic diptera, and the only aquatic dipteran in your bucket is mosquito larvae. So if a dragonfly larva gets in there, it won't hurt it. If a bird drinks it or your dog licks it, won't hurt it a bit. So this is a targeted way to control the mosquitoes in your yard. And if everybody did it, it would be nice and effective. It's cheap and it doesn't kill anything else. Fourth thing we need to do is to design our landscapes in a way that allows caterpillars to complete their development. I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where there are 511 species of caterpillars that develop on oaks. A few of them, like the Polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. Caterpillar eats the leaves, it spins a cocoon and hangs from one of the branches, then it emerges as an adult, and then it does it all again. I wish everything did that, but most species don't. 480 of those species, 94%, drop from the tree after they finish growing and wiggle their way beneath the ground and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that is under the tree. And that's the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree. And we mow and compact the soil under our trees so much that it's usually too hard for caterpillars to get under there. So the way we landscape becomes an ecological trap. If any moth does find our trees and lays an egg and the caterpillars develop, they fall down and then they die. And of course, the cement landscape is even less of a viable option for caterpillars. This is what most people do. You have a big tree in a lawn. Nobody's measured how well caterpillars survive in a situation like this, but I guarantee they survive better in a situation like this, where you have a tree and a layered landscape, maybe a dogwood here and a native azalea and ferns and ground cover. Caterpillar drops down to a safe site. The soil's nice and loose. It can easily get beneath the ground and pupate, or a spinning cocoon in the leaf litter that's under there. Nobody's going to mow it. Nobody's going to trample it. Survivorship will be much higher. This is where you can do your spring ephemeral gardening. This is how you shrink the lawn, put big beds around your trees, safe sites. This is where you can use your ground covers, things like wild ginger or May apples or foam flower, jack in the pulpits. They all can go there, safe sites. Or ferns. This is a hotel in Athens, Georgia. These are red maples. Any caterpillar that develops on here can drop down in this fern bed and make it, complete its development, even though it's the middle of a city. So we can do a lot better with the land under our trees. Another grad student, Desiree Narango, has done some wonderful work with Carolina chickadee in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and her results suggest there actually is room for compromise in our plant choices. What she did was look at Carolina chickadee sustainability in landscapes that were dominated by native plants and landscapes compared with landscapes dominated by the introduced ornamentals we typically use. When the landscapes are dominated by introduced ornamentals, they reduced caterpillars by 75%. So right away, you reduce the amount of bird food by 75%. Those landscapes were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. So there's nest boxes up, but the chickadees would come and say, there's not enough food here. We're not even going to try. If they did try, they laid 1.5 fewer eggs. Those clutches were 29% less likely to survive. If they did survive, they produced 1.2 fewer fledglings, and it took them 1.5 days longer to reach maturity. If you put all that together into a population growth model as a function of the percentage of non-native woody plant biomass in your yard. The reason we look at woody plant biomass is because chickadees forage on woody plants, not on the ground. This is what you get. Dotted line is the replacement rate for the population. That's the rate at which the population has to make babies in order to replace the adults that die every year. If you make that many babies, you have a sustainable population. It's not growing, but it's not shrinking either. If you make more babies than adults die, you've got a growing population. But if you make fewer, below this dotted line here, you have a shrinking, unsustainable population. Right here is where those lines overlap, generously speaking, which means you can have up to 30% of your woody plant biomass non-native in your yard without destroying the food web that supports the birds. None of these should be invasive plants. I mean, that's we're drawing the line there. But you can have your ginkgo, that's not going to move, your crepe myrtle, your boxwood, as long as they don't dominate the landscape, as long as 70% of your plant biomass is native. And this is that area of compromise that I'm excited about. If I said you can't have any non-native plants, there'd be very few people listening to me. It's not the presence of non-native plants that destroys food webs. It's the absence of those productive native plants. So if we add more of those, the productive native plants, we can tolerate some non-natives. Can native plants be used in formal designs? Of course they can. I got this picture from Lynn O'Shaughnessy the other day. This is her dream garden come true. This is taken from a drone, by the way. That's up there. That's a big garden. Every single plant in that extremely formal landscape is a native plant. Formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal gardens in Europe all the time. And I guess that's okay because they're non-native plants over there. Can we get a pollinator garden into a typical suburban yard like this without offending anybody? Of course we can. Put a little fence around it. It's beautiful. It's functional. It's obviously not a pile of weeds. It's helping the local native bees. Let's recall why we need pollinators. You hear every day that it's because they pollinate a third of our crops. But, you know, people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. Forget our crops. It's only about a 1/12 of our crops anyway. They pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lost our pollinators, we'd lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. Not an option. Where do we need pollinators? Everywhere we need plants, which is everywhere. This is a Drew Latham design. Much bigger, beautiful. Imagine the amount of life supported here versus the amount of life that's here. Seems like a no-brainer. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Yes, they can, and more of them are doing exactly that. This is spreading rapidly. And Minnesota is the first state to kick it off. They had this lawn to legume program. It was a cost-sharing program designed to encourage homeowners to take out some or all of their lawn and replace it with appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. Very popular. You get paid to do that. Pennsylvania's got a brand new lawn conversion program. It's only 2 years old. You get up to $5,000 per acre to take out your lawn and put in appropriate native plants. It was designed to help watersheds, but I don't care. I mean, it's going to help the biodiversity at the same time. I believe Maryland and Virginia are fooling with similar programs. Florida. There's an island off of Florida where they're paying people to allow the burrowing owl, a listed species, to actually burrow in the front yard. This is the way the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. You get paid to take care of an endangered species on your property rather than fined if you do something. Everybody would want one. It'd be very popular. Missouri, Fayetteville, Arkansas had a bounty on calorie pears, highly invasive ornamentals. You take out a calorie pear, you get a free tree replacement. Even public utilities are getting into the act. In San Antonio, the water system's giving people $100 coupons to take out their thirsty non-natives and putting in water-efficient native plants. And of course, all of the very successful lawn conversion programs in California. You know, they don't have the water for lawns, so take them out, put in the efficient xeric plantings. I think we made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. This is the first one. We don't think nature's essential. That's a serious mistake, folks. You know, the national park system, the Congress has described the budget for our national park system as non-essential. We like nature, you know, it's pretty. Some of us even think it's important, but not essential, which means when push comes to shove, nature always takes a back seat. I went to the Cincinnati Zoo before the virus broke out. And there was this wall-sized poster there saying, we should save wildlife for future generations. I think this epitomizes our country's view of why we do conservation. It was certainly Teddy Roosevelt's view. We're going to create the national park system so the future generations can enjoy the splendor of the US. But to me, that suggests nature's there just for entertainment. It is entertaining, but it's far more important than that. We need to save nature so that we have future generations. A little bit more urgent. We've also assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. Now, we talked about this, but if we restrict conservation just to areas where we don't have a lot of humans, we're going to fail because those areas are not big enough and they're too disconnected. David Quammen has an analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. This is a functional Persian rug. That is not 71 Persian rugs. That's 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting like a Persian rug. And that's what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance, but I hate that terminology because it suggests there are places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our corporate landscapes, including our roadsides, even much of our agriculture. So we need to glue our rug back together again by putting the plants back, not just to make biological corridors so that plants and animals can move back and forth between viable habitat. We need to create viable habitat where we've destroyed it. right where we live, where we work, where we play, we're going to start to coexist with nature. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship just to a few specialists. We didn't see it as an inherent responsibility of every human being on the planet. But I don't know why, because every human being on the planet depends entirely on the quality of Earth's ecosystems. So why wouldn't everybody bear the responsibility for good Earth stewardship? Stan Rushworth, a Cherokee elder, once said, the Western settler mindset was, I have rights. The mindset of indigenous people is, I have obligations. You're not born with these mindsets, you're taught them. We're very good at teaching this. We're terrible at teaching our kids and our peers their obligations to our only planet. It doesn't mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you really can save it where you live. And if you do that, it empowers you. You know, right now, so many of us feel powerless. The Earth's problems are huge. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink their lawn, can get rid of their invasive plants, can put in Keystone plants and put in a pollinator garden. Revitalize the ecosystem in their yard so that it enhances local ecosystems rather than degrades them. It also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problem. Just think about your little piece of the planet. If you own property, that's obvious. That's where you're going to start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy or a park or a preserve. They're all underfunded, all understaffed. They will love you. So as property owners or as volunteers, each one of us has the power, and we certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we decide to do so is going to determine nature's fate and then ultimately our own fate. I think I've convinced my grandchildren that you are nature's best hope. I hope I've convinced you as well. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Doug. That was amazing. Okay, I'm going to read some of the questions that have been in the chat. I obviously don't think we're going to be able to get to every question. There's a lot of questions. So the first question, and I think it's a great question for everybody, how large a quantity of plants are needed to attract these insects to a small backyard or a deck or a balcony or a front stoop?
We don't know. But, you know, I have seen insects on some very small plantings. So, for example, it depends on how mobile the insect is. If you had a container garden on your porch with milkweed in it, I put money on the fact that monarchs would find it, that many of our native bees would find it. Of course, the bigger the better. There's no doubt about it. But those small properties are part of that matrix that's out there. And remember, your small property is attached to another one. If you get your neighbor to do the same thing, all of a sudden your small property is not so small anymore. So everybody should jump in.
Great. Somebody asked about Virginia creeper, and does it damage brick wall or trees that it grows on?
Does not damage trees. Yeah, I wouldn't put it on brick walls. They do have little tendrils that grab on. It's not as bad as ivy, which everybody puts on their brick walls, but it grows. So any of these vines, native or not, grow. I wouldn't put them right next to the house, but they, the beauty of our native vines is that they don't girdle the trees. They don't strangle them, particularly Virginia creeper. So
it's good to know. Somebody asked about, they mentioned that a lot of native plants seem to be require a lot of sun. And do you have suggestions for shady areas that are under oaks and hickories? I know you touched on that before.
Yeah, you know, almost all plants want sun in order to bloom, but a lot of them do well in shade. Under oaks, it's particularly in this part of the country, it's often quite acidic. So things like native azaleas do really well. Any of the spring ephemeral ground covers do well because they're out and doing their thing before the leaves even come out. There's a lot of sun early in the fall. Hydrangea arborescens, the native hydrangea that belongs here, straight species, not Annabelle, blooms. You can have pretty heavy shade, and it blooms in the shade. So, but even if your plants don't bloom, like your native viburnums and things, they're still functional under your trees.
Okay, great. How do you get garden centers to stock native plants?
You go to the garden center and say, I want to buy this native plant. Oh, you don't have it? Goodbye. If everybody said that, they would stock it the next day, believe me.
It's a great point. So I had a question myself. I understand there's a problem with a lot of plants that are sold in various settings, that they have neonicotinoids infused into them. And so even though they might be something that would be attractive to a pollinator, it would kill them.
It is a problem. And you know, I have sympathy for a lot of the nursery growers who are growing stock over the winter time. It is very hard to grow in a greenhouse without spider mites, without thrips, without whiteflies really wiping out your plants. And that's why they use those products. It is very easy to grow them outside without using those products. And there are more and more growers who are finding ways to do it without neonics. So you can ask, say, do you grow, you know, without neonics? And that will work. But keep in mind, if you do end up buying something that had a neonic treatment, it doesn't last forever. The plants actually can outgrow it after a while. So so you're not, you know, it's not deadly for the rest of time.
Right. And somebody asked here saying, I went to Home Depot and asked for clover seeds and they had no idea what I was talking about. How on earth can we educate people and corporations? They still stock Roundup in every store. I would say don't buy plants at Home Depot.
Yeah, Home Depot should not be your first stop. There are lots of nurseries around, and many of them are specialty nurseries, and even the regular nurseries are carrying a greater percentage of native plants. Nurserymen they know plants. Home Depot does not know plants, and they hire people who know nothing about plants. They are making an effort because they realize there's a market there, but they're not plant specialists. So.
Right, and I'd like to add also that there are a lot of native plant nurseries that do mail order, and you can get plugs, and you can get seeds, and you can really get whatever you need. You just have to do a little research online.
And specify where you live so they can make an attempt at matching up the provenance. They want to get seeds and plants from where you are.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay, I was just looking at my notes and I'm going to go back to the chat. Okay, here's the question. How native is native? I want to plant a Betula nigra river birch native to eastern US in southwest Canada.
You know, there's there's a web tool. It's called BONAP, B-O-N-A-P, that will show you the natural distribution of every plant in, at least in the US. I don't know if it goes up into Canada, but you have to look at the northern range. So I'm pretty sure that river birch or black birch, all those birches go up pretty far, but that's what I would check and see how far north it goes. You don't want to plant it above, you know, where it can handle the winters. But in terms of the longitude, there's no problem there. It would do fine that way.
Okay, there's a couple of questions about that, the concept of the bucket with the mosquito dunks. People have asked you if you could repeat what you put in it and how many of these buckets would you want to have in your yard to really make it work?
You know, it depends on how bad your mosquito problem is. You want to make your bucket the destination of your ovipositing mosquitoes. If you've got, you know, a lot of wet areas that the mosquitoes can go to, you want to make it more attractive. You put in straw or hay, which ferments for a couple of days. And, you know, a lot of people are, you know, they're saying, I should get it out right now. There are very few mosquitoes around right now. Wait till it warms up in the summertime when they actually become an issue. And that's all you do. It just, you know, it will become irresistible to ovipositing mosquitoes. And then you plop in the dunk and you're all set. And people say, well, why don't you just dump the bucket out? You could do that too, and then start all over again if you did that every 2 or 3 weeks, or even sooner. Mosquito larvae develop really fast. So.
Okay, that's great. I've never heard of that. And we have a lot of mosquitoes where I live in Summit. A few nice comments. Thank you so much for this presentation. I am feeling pretty hopeless, but have also been pretty useless in helping to fix these problems. I have more hope and tools to be more useful, and will do both.
Good.
Very nice. Okay. I live in Long Island. Often when a property is sold, the new owner completely clear cuts the property. Years and decades of nurturing natives on a property can be undone in one weekend with chainsaws and weed whackers. Any thoughts or things being done to try to perpetuate and preserve habitats of private residents?
You know why they do that? Because their realtor told them to. So we need to do a better job at reaching the real estate industry and recognizing these actually can be selling points to a lot of people. They still are in the mindset that it's got to be the way it was in the 50s, where you can't sell your house. And in some places, you know, that's still true, but in other places it's not. I've met a number of people that are looking for places like that, and they won't buy one that isn't like that. So I wish the real estate business would catch on a little bit.
And on top of that, I would say you can be an active citizen in your own town and work with your town to create rules and regulations about trees. In our town, in Summit, if you have a tree over a certain diameter, you have to get a permit to take it down, and you have to plant another tree. So I would say don't give up and be active citizens, and make what's important to others.
Keep in mind, though, when you take down that 300-year-old oak and put in a 3-inch oak, that's not an equal trade-off.
No, of course not. Of course not. But I think just having to get a permit makes people think about it before they take it down.
It does.
Okay, people have mentioned to get involved in the Native Plant Society of New Jersey.
Right.
It's a wonderful website. New Jersey Friendly Lawns is a wonderful, Jersey Friendly Yards is a wonderful website. Lots of information. Oh, here's a good question. Aren't caterpillars sometimes destructive to trees? We have many fallen trees. Can we remove some, or will we uproot colonies of insects?
Okay, that's two different questions. Yes, caterpillars can be destructive to trees, and those are typically the introduced ones, things like gypsy moth. I am not promoting any non-native species because they come here without their natural enemies. That's why gypsy moth is so destructive. That's why winter moth is so destructive. That's why emerald ash borer is so destructive. They're non-native insects wreaking havoc over here because there's nothing controlling them. So your dead trees, that's probably what you're talking about, is the emerald ash borer that has killed a lot of our ashes. So you don't want a dead tree falling on your house. You've got to take care of that. But coarse woody debris, and if you can leave it on some part of your property, a lot of things use that, can be a valuable ecological resource.
If we are getting rid of invasives, should I tackle that this year completely before I start planting natives?
Well, I could answer that if I saw your property. There's never a bad time to get rid of invasives. But you probably can start planting natives at the same time. It depends, if you're going to throw seed out there, native seeds, and then start pulling out lots of invasives. Depends on how you're adding the natives and how you're going to get rid of the invasives.
Can you plant to invite other species and avoid bees because of little children?
The bees you want to avoid because of little children are honeybees. They're the ones that sting you. The native bees that we're trying to promote are not, most of them are solitary. They're not protecting a hive. They're not aggressive. You can pet them when they're on flowers. The honeybee is the aggressive one, but most people that get stung, they blame it on bees, but it's really yellow jackets. It's yellow jackets and Polistes wasps. They're not bees at all, and that's not what we're trying to promote. And you know what? If a child gets stung, it is not the end of the world. I know I'm gonna get hate mail for that, but I still remember the first time I stepped on a honeybee. It's a learning experience, but life is not risk-free. That's all I can say.
Okay, I live in an area that is wet and has tons of cedars, dogwoods, and native honeysuckle. Are they okay to support insect species? I'm on the monarch flight path, so I try to grow swamp milkweed as well as the other milkweeds.
Native honeysuckle is very good. It's a wonderful hummingbird plant. Cedars are good. And I forget what the other one she said was.
Honeysuckle, dogwoods, cedars.
Dogwoods. If you have a lot of native honeysuckle, that's great, but I'd be surprised. Check and make sure it's really native, because typically if you got a lot of something, it's typically non-native, both bush and vine.
Okay. Can we start a campaign to get the local, state, federal government to want to invest in nature?
Well, Joe Biden says he's got the 30-30 plan. We're gonna save 30% of the country by 2030. That's something we should be taking advantage of. I want to push, we certainly want to preserve as much land as possible, but we've got to do conservation outside the parks and preserves if it's gonna succeed. I just don't think Joe's thought of that yet. So yes, we can. You tell people this is an important issue. I'm not going to vote for you unless you do something about it. They'll listen. They just want a job.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that, in fact, there have been many bills introduced in the New Jersey legislature over the last couple of years. I don't think they've gone anywhere, but if your legislator starts hearing from you about this, they're going to get more interested.
Here's a quick example. Delaware just passed a ban on selling invasive plants in nurseries unanimously, both sides of the aisle, unanimous. I still can't believe it, but it can happen.
In your book, Nature's Best Hope, you say that the hardest group of people to engage are those who don't care about nature. Can you recommend a resource that explains why we will lose humans if we don't preserve plants and animals?
That's why I wrote the book. I think if you read Nature's Best Hope, that message should come across.
How can we best get rid of ticks besides chickens and opossums?
Opossums. Well, the ticks that most people worry about are deer ticks, and chickens and opossums don't eat them. They're just too small. The real answer is you get rid of your deer, because there is when we grew up, there were hardly any deer around. We had no deer ticks. We had no Lyme disease. Then we let the deer population explode, and now we have both. So that's the true answer. It's part of the cycle. There's something else you can try. It's a product called Daminex that I think you put. It's a product on cotton balls, and then the mice that also carry the deer ticks take it back to their nest. It might be a pyrethroid, but it kills the ticks on the mice without killing the mice. And people say that works. I've never tried it, but the real, the ultimate solution is to control our deer population. And there's other reasons we need to do that too.
Okay. Somebody commented that you should support native and threatened bats with bat houses, and they eat tons of mosquitoes at night.
That's right. That is right.
Somebody says, I've been asking nurseries if they will have native plants in a designated area labeled. Several will by mid-May. Dryers in Cranford, Halls in Berkeley Heights, the farm in Green Village, with signs, Great Swamp Greenhouses, and others keep asking. That's very good.
I am glad to hear Halls is still in Berkeley Heights. It was there when I was a little boy. That's great.
And they're still very busy. Our local group of our regional pollinators working group, we sponsored a native plant sale through the Great Swamp watershed. Wonderful. We've sold 13,000 plants. We're going to be distributing them next week.
Excellent.
Let's see. Somebody asked, I have a pond/swamp on my property. Can you put the mosquito dunks in the pond?
If you have permanent body of water, that's not what's generating your mosquitoes. It's the temporary bodies of waters. So pond is very different from a swamp. If a swamp has little pockets that dry up, that's where the mosquitoes are. There's a cost to trying to control mosquitoes in natural areas that way with those mosquito dunks, because it kills all aquatic Diptera, including all the chironomids and other things that are important components of food webs. If you wipe out the mosquito larvae in your pond, you're also wiping out the predators that depend on them, like your dragonflies, and there's a whole bunch of predators that eat mosquito larvae. That's not what's generating the adult mosquitoes. Most of the larvae don't make it. It's the temporary bodies of water. What's a big generator of mosquitoes that people don't think about is the street sewers, where they don't drain completely. There's an inch of water in there and they're underground, so you don't think about it. Throw a dunk in there, because that's generating a lot of mosquitoes. And of course, your gutters that are not clean. My gutters aren't cleaned either, so I get it. But
Okay, somebody asked, what is the best way to get rid of invasives?
the fastest way, it depends on what the species is. You know, a lot of people are totally against herbicides. You've got to kill the roots, or it's going to just come back. So if you have woody invasives, cutting them at the base and painting the stump with an herbicide is the fastest way. I don't like spraying because you always hit non-targets, and it takes a lot of material. But there are things like Japanese stilt grass that you can use pre-emergent herbicide on that. It's just a terrible problem. We've created a terrible, terrible problem with these invasives, and there's no easy solution to it.
Okay, I just want to make an announcement. The South Orange Public Library is hosting a Zoom event on Friday night at 7 p.m. called Let's Plant New Jersey. It's a follow-up to this event planned by my friend, Susan Haig, and there will be 6 experts in various nature/ecological stewardship careers. And she put the website on the chat. If you're interested, it's towards the bottom. You can also just go to the South Orange Public Library's website for that. Now, I'll ask you one more question, Doug, and I think we're going to be done.
Okay.
I think we could be here all night. When trying to get a native plant garden started, I'm worried that deer will eat and destroy the natives that we plant. How do we manage the deer? Big problem.
It is. You know, the deer have been a large factor in creating the invasive species problem, because they selectively eat the natives and tip the competitive balance against it. I've gotten the things going on our property with cages. I put 5-foot metal cages. I get them. That's something I do buy at home, at Home Depot and Lowe's. I'm still using the same cages we used when we moved in. It's 20 years, and I move them around when I put a new plant in. But if I don't, the deer eat them immediately. So I know they're ugly, but they do work. I've got 10 acres. I'm not going to fence the whole property, but it's another reason that keeping deer populations down is important. People say I want deer resistant plants. Well, those are also insect resistant plants for the same reason. They don't like them, and it's not going to support a food web very well.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful evening. I know everyone's excited that there's a recording, because there was so much information presented and we couldn't, any of us, absorb all of it in one go. So everyone will get an email with the link for the recording, and you can share it with everyone you know so that they can learn as well. And just want to thank you, Doug. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting you tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Can you send me that link too?
Of course.
Thanks.
All righty. So
all right. Good night, everybody.
Say good night to everybody. Good night.